Hello, grade 10s, and welcome to muscle tissue. This lesson is going to be quite long, so if you need to do it over 2 days, just let me know. That is fine. It is 22 slides, but there's a lot of pictures involved, so don't worry too much. It's more explanation. All right, so we're going to start with muscle, and muscle is pretty cool. So you can see the background over there. Those are all the muscle groups, and it allows you to move. Okay, and it is also what we eat. So when people say to you, oh, you're eating chicken or you're eating beef, you're eating pork, what are you eating of it? You're eating its muscles, all right? It's the muscles that taste good. It's what we like. It's also what we use to do bodybuilding, but unfortunately, to a large extent, we've also found that a lot of companies actually inject they're developing farm animals with a whole bunch of hormones that gets transferred into our bodies that can actually cause us to develop unnaturally, and some of them actually inject them with antibiotics, which can cause resistance in humans as well. So not only are they creating super bugs, but they're also changing the way that we naturally function. I'm not advocating for veganism or vegetarianism. I'm just explaining the bits and pieces, and that's why a lot of times people opt for free range meat, just so you guys have an understanding. All right, let's begin. So I hope that you guys have been keeping up with this table. This is the next part of it. So you're going to be doing muscle and nerve. Okay, so there's smooth, skeletal, and cardiac, and you're going to look at the structure, the function, and the location. So what they're attached to, how they work, and what they actually do. All right, so now let's have a look at this structure, okay? Because muscles come with a whole bunch of bits and pieces, and the way that they actually form is like layered. So, a very large muscle is made up of smaller tubes, which are made out of smaller tubes, which are made out of smaller tubes, which are made out of functional units. And I'll show you diagrams of each and every single one of those. There is a lot of terminology in this as well. So let's begin. All living things can perform certain types of movement. Muscle tissue has the ability to relax or contract. Also, movement is also known as locomotion. All right, and that's movement, and this brings about the movement and mechanical work in various parts of the body. Okay, you can also build your muscles, which is what a lot of bodybuilders tend to do. All right, so there are some movements in the body that are necessary for life, and necessary for life that are not voluntary. So we're going to be speaking about voluntary muscles and involuntary muscles. So voluntary muscles are the ones that you can consciously decide to move, whereas involuntary are the ones that you cannot. Something like your heart. Maybe the muscles around your intestines, okay? To a large extent, those are going to be the ones that we don't want to be able to regulate, because otherwise, if we could stop it, that means we would either die from indigestion or our heart would just not pump. All right, so there are 3 different types. Muscles can be divided into 3 groups according to their structure: smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, also known as striated muscle. And then we have cardiac or heart muscle, also known as striated branched muscle. Okay. You also need to know the alternatives to all of those, because that's going to be important when you answer a test. All right, so this is the structure of an entire muscle. Okay, we're going to look at the muscle as a whole. So we have the epimysium, which surrounds the entire muscle. We have the perimysium, which surrounds bundles of muscle fibers, or the fascicules. Fascicules, however you feel like pronouncing it. Fascicules, just, it's easier to remember. Then we have the endomysium, which surrounds individual muscle fibers. Okay, so you can see that each and every time there is a surrounding tissue for each and every single different type of fiber. Let's have a look at what this looks like. So all the way on the outside over there, you can see on the sort of middle part, there's a pink structure, what you would recognize as the muscle, and that is the epimysium, epi meaning on top, mys or myo meaning muscle. Okay, so on top of the muscle. Then just inside over that, we have the perimysium that is holding all of those big structures in over there. Then finally we have the endomysium, which is in between the perimysium. Okay, so epimysium right on the outside, inside of that the perimysium, inside of that the endomysium. All right, so there's a whole bunch of words. Let's start with the word sarco. Sarco meaning flesh. Okay, and we're going to be talking about it quite often. You can actually see that I've included a lovely little GIF at the bottom right hand corner about how these things work. So we have the sarcomere, which is a structural unit of the myofibril. In striated muscle, we have the sarcolemma, which is the muscle cell membrane. We also have the sarcoplasm, which we'll deal with a little bit later. And then we have these things called myofibrils, okay? Myofibrils are thread-like strands within the muscle fibers, and they are made out of actin and myosin, okay? So over there you can see that the red lines that are moving are actin, and the green that are pulling those red lines in and out are the myosin. And you can see that the myosin itself actually has these little arm-like structures which they use to hold onto the actin and actually pull it inwards and outwards depending on how we need the muscle to work. Okay, so let's have a look at the first one. Please will you draw this diagram for me? Diagram of a smooth muscle. This is the way that you are able to recognize it. So it's made up of thin, elongated muscle fibers, or muscle cells and fibers. Each cell is filled with a specialized cytoplasm called the sarcoplasm. All right, so not just cytoplasm, not just the liquid of the cell, now specifically liquid of the flesh, okay, which is quite gross, but anyway. Surrounded by a thin membrane called the sarcolemma, which we've dealt with already. And then this is what they actually look like, okay? You do not need to recognize these structures. This is just to help you and also explain that bit at the top there. So each cell has a myofibril or longitudinal contractile element of the muscle cell, and it's made up of myosin and actin. And these individual myofibrils are parallel to one another in direction of the long axis of the cell, okay? You don't need to know all those weird and wonderful things. You just need to know that these myofibrils are parallel to each other, and as they contract, they pull the whole cell towards each other, and that is making the actual cell shorter, causing the entire muscle to shorten, and that contracts, and then when it relaxes, the whole muscle expands quite a bit. And I want you to move your arm while you do this, and actually, or move your legs, and recognize how the muscles actually become longer and shorter depending on how you actually move your body. All right, so it's not arranged in a definite striped or striated pattern. We'll talk about striated a little bit later, as in skeletal muscles, or skeletal, I don't know how you feel like pronouncing it. This is why it's called smooth muscle. They are involuntary tissue, okay? Involuntary. Your body doesn't choose consciously. It is all done unconsciously, all right? And it's not controlled by active thought. Forms muscle layers in the walls of hollow organs. This is so important. I really cannot explain to you how important this is, okay? So the digestive tract, so the lower parts of the esophagus, stomach, and intestines. I've included a little diagram there in case you don't know where your intestines are. And the stomach sits just above that. The walls of your bladder, your uterus, okay, seeing as you are a woman, you have a uterus, and the walls of blood vessels, okay? You need your blood vessels to be able to contract and relax so that they can actually determine how your blood pressure is going to be working. So control slow involuntary movements such as a contraction of smooth muscle tissue in the walls of the stomach intestines. We just went over that. And finally, muscles of arteries contract and relax to regulate blood pressure and the flow of blood, okay, blood pressure. And blood pressure is actually by definition the force of the liquid of the blood actually pushing out on the walls of the blood vessel, okay? It's not how forceful the liquid is being pushed through, but more how much the liquid is being pushed outwards on all parts of that cellular structure. Okay, let's look at skeletal muscle tissue. It's the most abundant tissue in vertebrate body, attached to and bring about movement of various bones of tendons, okay, sorry, of the skeleton. The whole muscle, example bicep, is enclosed in the sheath of connective tissue called the epimysium. See, this is where it's starting to come up. That's why I did it earlier. And the shields fold inwards into substance of muscle to surround large number of smaller bundles called the fasciculi. All right, so there is a diagram at the bottom over there on the bottom left-hand corner. Don't draw this. It's a better one. You'll draw, I think, in the next slide. What you need to recognize is it has these lines, okay? These lines have names. You're in grade 10. You don't need to know those lines. When you get to university one day, then you will have to learn those lines, okay? And if you feel like Googling it, you're more than welcome. Just there's like Z lines and A lines and A bands, and it becomes quite complex. So don't get too confused with all of it. You just need to know that it has those individual bands, and then those blue things over there are the nuclei. So notice how the nuclei are on the surface just directly underneath the epimysium, okay? So they serve to function the entire muscle length, okay? And a whole bunch of cells are affected by this, and we'll see as we get into a bit of great detail. So I want you to draw that on the far right hand side over there. You can see those lines. And then we're speaking about the muscle fiber, and that is a cell as a whole. Note that it does have a nucleus, okay? And then we have the striations, which are those lines that are created. And those lines being solid tubes indicate that this is skeletal muscle. So the fasciculi consist of smaller bundles of elongated cylindrical muscle cells called fibers, okay? So in other words, a whole bunch of those fibers put alongside each other, and a group of them is called the fasciculi. Electron microscope enables us to see that the muscle fiber is made up of smaller units called myofibrils. We'll get into that in a bit. And the myofibril consists of small protein filaments known as the actin and myosin filaments. So let's have a look at what I'm actually saying, because let's like break it down from the top all the way through to the bottom, okay, or from very coarse scale to very fine scale. So we have the muscle as a whole in the top left hand corner over there, and then you're going to see we're going to take a chunk of that, so like one of the bits of it, and that is surrounded by the epimysium, and inside of that we're going to find a muscle bundle, okay? So this is a whole bunch of those tubes I was talking about earlier put together to create a bundle. If we take that bundle and we take one of the strands out inside of that, we're going to see the fasciculi. So that fasciculi or fascicle is made up of a whole bunch of muscle fibers, which you can see on the right hand side of that. And that muscle fiber is known as a muscle cell. Now, those muscle cells are made out of myofibrils, okay? So it's a whole bunch of these individual pieces put together, and it creates a long strand, okay? That's the muscle cell and the myofibril. And then finally, inside of the myofibril, you're going to be finding the sarcomere, all right? And there you can see your actin and your myosin. Your myosin is your thick filament, and your actin is your thin filament, all right? And those pull on each other to shorten and elongate the muscle as a whole. So I've included that diagram again, just so that you guys can actually see what it looks like. I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. All right, it's dead. Then we're going to have, during contraction of skeletal muscle tissue, actin filaments slide inwards between the myosin filaments, okay? So it's the actin that's moving, not the myosin. Even though the myosin actually is able to like grab on and move to some extent, it's not exactly moving. Causes shortening of the sarcomeres, which causes the muscle fiber to contract, okay? So when those actin filaments are pulled towards each other, that causes a shortening of the entire sarcomere, and that then causes shortening of the muscles and causing it to contract. This brings about the shortening of the entire muscle, depending on the number of muscle fibers that were stimulated, okay? So not all the muscle fibers are going to be stimulated simultaneously, and if you did, your whole body wouldn't be able to move, okay? Because it would just be stuck when all your muscles contract, and your body wouldn't be able to move. So you do need some to contract and some to relax. And we'll talk about antagonistic muscles as well a little bit later. So the contraction of skeletal muscle fibers is very quick and very forceful, all right? It needs to be, because if you are in a bit of a sticky situation and you need to get out, the quickest way is to move your muscles, and your muscles will then allow you to function as best as humanly possible. Alright, so now we're going to talk about antagonistic muscles. So what I want you to do is I want you to raise your arm up like you're flexing for someone you like really want to show off to. And I want you to feel, and I want you to pull quite hard. And I want you to feel the top of the muscle and notice how it is quite short, and notice it's relatively hard. And then feel underneath, you'll notice that the muscle is extremely long and it is not as hard, okay? So it has not contracted. So the bottom has not contracted, your tricep has not contracted, while the top bicep has contracted. Then when you extend your arm, you notice that the bicep itself, the muscle at the top, has gone extremely soft, and it is not contracted anymore. It's elongated, it's not contracted, whereas the bottom at the back over here has become extremely tight and shortened, which allowed the body to extend the arm outwards. Okay, so every single set of muscles has a pair. And if you feel the top of your legs and the bottom of your legs as well, while you're moving them up and down, you'll be able to feel exactly the same thing. You need one to contract while the other one relaxes. And when one contracts, it actually forces the other one to relax, and vice versa, okay? And that is what allows you to get that movement of forward, backwards, forward, backwards, forward, backwards, forward, backwards. And that is what they're showing in over here. I don't need you to know any of the other bits and pieces. I just need you to look at the muscles themselves and how when some are contracted, some are relaxed. Okay, so what is the functions? The function in pairs to bring about coordinated movement, limbs, trunk, jaws, eyeballs. Your trunk, by the way, is like your stomach area. So anything from just below your, or like just by like around your ribs all the way down to your pelvis. That's your trunk area, okay? So it's by bringing about coordinated movements. This is specifically for skeletal muscle. All right, let's talk about some cardiac muscle, the thing that keeps you alive. It's only found in the walls of the heart. That is it, okay? It's an involuntary muscle tissue, like smooth muscle. So it is completely, it gets told what to do subconsciously by the brain, and you can't actually forcefully make your heart increase or decrease by thinking about it. But if you start changing, like holding your breath, running a lot, that will change your heart's rate, but it's not like you are consciously telling it to increase or decrease, okay? So it plays the most important role on contraction of the atria and ventricles of the heart, which we'll do next year, and causes rhythmical beating of the heart, circulating blood and its contents throughout the body, okay? So you can see at the bottom over there, I've included what it kind of looks like, and it looks exactly like skeletal muscle, but now it is branched, which means that it is connected to parallel or adjacent muscle fibers. And when it is connected to that, it ensures that it is a more interwoven, more knitted set of muscles, which are able to pump harder for longer and keep you going for many years. Also remember that your heart has never stopped beating even before you were born. So that good old bad boy has kept you going. All right, look after your heart. I want you to draw this, please. This is extremely, please change, it says myofibril, it's myofibril. And then we have the nucleus and intercalated discs. I don't expect you to know the word intercalated disc. What I want you to make a note of is that this is striated, branched muscle, okay? And then finally, this is just all three put together so that you guys can see what it looks like. So we have, I've just indicated where the striations are, or where the muscle fibers are, as well as the nuclei, just so that you guys have an understanding of where these are. So at the bottom, top left-hand corner, we've got our striated muscle, which is also known as your skeletal or skeletal muscle. You can see that the nuclei are all placed all over the place. They have striations, which means they have those bands. Then at the bottom right-hand corner, we have smooth muscle. Note how they all kind of like link into each other, but they don't actually, like, they aren't attached. They're just right next to each other, and that causes involuntary movements, whereas striated is voluntary. Then finally, on the far right-hand side, we have branched or cardiac muscle or heart muscle, and it is branched striated muscle. All right, so if this is too long, just let me know, but it's only about 19 minutes. All right, look after yourselves, grade 10s, and I will see you soon. Cheers.